We continue the Varieties of Religious Experience, a study in human nature by William James, by starting on chapter 18, Philosophy. The subject of saintliness left us face to face with the question, is the sense of divine presence a sense of anything objectively true? Well, there's different sorts of objective, right? There's physical and psychological, and there's spiritual. And, well, psychological, that doesn't sound right, but maybe you understand what I mean. We turned first to mysticism for an answer and found that although mysticism is entirely willing to corroborate religion, it is too private and also too various in its utterances to be able to claim a universal authority. But philosophy publishes results which claim to be universal. Don't lick my wounds. To claim a universal authority. But philosophy publishes results which claim to be universally valid, if they're valid at all. So we can now turn with our question to philosophy. Can philosophy stamp a warrant of veracity upon the religious man's sense of the divine? I imagine that many of you at this point begin to indulge in guesses at the goal to which I'm tending. I have undermined the authority of mysticism, you say, and the next thing I shall probably do is to seek to discredit that of philosophy. Religion, you expect to hear me conclude, is nothing but an affair of faith, based either on vague sentiment or on that vivid sense of the reality of things unseen, of which in my second lecture and in the lecture on mysticism I gave so many examples. It is essentially private and individualistic. It always exceeds our powers of formulation, and although attempts to pour its contents into a philosophic mold will probably always go on, men being what they are, yet these attempts are always secondarily processes which in no way add to the authority or warrant the veracity of the sentiments from which they derive their own stimulus and borrow whatever glow of conviction they may themselves possess. And in short, you suspect that I am planning to defend feeling at the expense of reason, to rehabilitate the primitive and unreflective, and dissuade you from the hope of any theology worthy of the name. To a certain extent, I have to admit that you guessed rightly. I do believe that feeling is the deeper source of religion, and that philosophic and theological formulas are secondary products like translations of a text into another tongue. But all such statements are misleading from their brevity, and it will take the whole hour for me to explain to you exactly what I mean. Oh, I thought for a second this was 50 minutes. That's 50 pages in an hour. That's quick talking. When I call theological formulas secondary products, I mean that in a world in which no religious feeling had ever existed, I doubt whether any philosophic theology could ever have been framed. I doubt if dispassionate intellectual contemplation of the universe, apart from inner unhappiness and need of deliverance on the one hand and mystical emotion on the other, would ever have resulted in religious philosophies such as we now possess. Men would have begun with animistic explanations of natural fact and criticized these away into scientific ones, as they actually have done. In the science, they would have left a certain amount of psychical research, even as they now will probably have to readmit a certain amount. But high-flying speculations like those of either dogmatic or idealistic theology, these they would have had no motive to venture on, feeling no need of commerce with such deities. These speculations might, it seems to me, be classed as overbeliefs, buildings outperformed by the intellect into directions in which feeling originally supplied the hint. But if religious philosophy had to have its first hint supplied by feeling, may it not have dealt in a superior way with the matter which feeling suggested? Feeling is private and dumb, and unable to give an account of itself. It allows that its results are mysterious and enigmas, declines to justify them rationally, and on occasion is willing that they should even pass for paradoxical and absurd. Philosophy takes just the opposite attitude. Her aspiration is to reclaim from mystery and paradox whatever territory she touches, to find an escape from obscure and wayward personal persuasion, the truth objectively valid for all thinking men has ever been intellect's most cherished ideal. To redeem religion from the unwholesome privacy and to give public status and universal right of way to its deliverances has been reason's task. I believe that philosophy will always have the opportunity to labor at this task. Compare Professor W. Wallace's Guildford Lectures and Essays, Oxford, 1898, pages 17. We are thinking beings, and we cannot exclude the intellect from participating in any of our functions, even in soliloquizing with ourselves. We construe our feelings intellectually. Both our personal ideals and our religious and mystical experiences must be interpreted congruously with the kind of scenery which our thinking mind inhabits. The philosophic climate of our time inevitably forces its own clothing on us. Moreover, we must exchange our feelings with one another, and in doing so we have to speak, and to use general and abstract verbal formulas. Conceptions and constructions are thus a necessary part of our religion, and as moderator amid the clash of hypotheses and a mediator among the criticism of one man's constructions by another, philosophy will always have much to do. It would be strange if I disputed this, when these very lectures which I am giving are, as you will see more clearly from now onwards, a laborious attempt to extract from the privacies of religious experience some general facts which can be defined in formulas upon which everybody may agree. Religious experience, in other words, spontaneous and inevitably engenders myths, superstitions, dogmas, creeds, and metaphysical theologies, and criticisms of one set of these by the adherents of another. Of late, impartial classifications and comparisons have become possible alongside the denunciations and anathemas by which the commerce between creeds used exclusively to be carried on. We have the beginnings of a science of religions, so-called, and if these lectures could ever be accounted a crumb-like contribution to such a science, I should be made very happy. But all these intellectual operations, whether they be constructive or comparative and critical, presuppose immediate experiences as their subject matter. They are interpretive and inductive operations after the fact, consequent upon religious feeling, not coordinate with it, not independent of what it ascertains. The intellectualism in religion which I wish to discredit pretends to be something altogether different from this. It assumes to construct religious objects out of the resources of logical reason alone, or of logical reason drawing rigorous inference from non-subjective facts. It calls its conclusions dogmatic theology or philosophy of the absolute, as the case may be. It does not call them science of religions. It reaches them in an a priori way, and warrants their veracity. Warranted systems have ever been the idols of aspiring souls, all-inclusive yet simple, noble, clean, luminous, stable, rigorous, true. What more ideal refuge could there be than such a system would offer to the spirits vexed by the muddiness and accidentality of the world of sensible things? Accordingly, we find inculcated in the theological schools of today, almost as much in those of foretime, a disdain for merely possible or probable truth, and of results that only private assurance can grasp. Scholastics and idealists both express this disdain. Principal John Caird, for example, writes as follows in his introduction to the philosophy of religion. Religion must indeed be a thing of the heart, but in order to alleviate it from the region of subjective caprice and waywardness, and to distinguish between that which is true and false in religion, we must appeal to an objective standard. That which enters the heart must be first discerned by the intelligence to be true, and must be seen as having its own nature, a right to dominate feeling, and as constituting the principle by which feeling must be judged. Option cited, page 174, abridged. In estimating the religious character of individuals, nations, or races, the first question is not how they feel, but what they think and believe, not whether their religion is one which manifests itself in emotions more or less vehement and enthusiastic, but what are the conceptions of God and divine things by which these emotions are called forth. Feeling is necessary in religion, but it is by content or intelligent basis of a religion, and not by feeling, that its character and worth are to be determined. Discourses 2:7. Cardinal Newman in his work, The Idea of a University, gives a more emphatic expression still to this disdain for sentiment. Theology, he says, is a science in the sense of in the strictest sense of the word. I will tell you, he says, what it is not. Physical evidences for God, not natural religion, for these are but vague, subjective interpretations. Yet he continues, the Supreme Being is powerful or skillful, just so far as the telescope shows power or the microscope shows skill. If his moral law is to be ascertained simply by the physical processes of the animal frame, are his will gathered from immediate issues of human affairs, if his essence is just as high and deep and broad as the universe and no more, if this be the fact, then will I confess that there is no specific science about God, that theology is but a name and a protest in its behalf, an hypocrisy, then pious as it is to think of him while the pageant of experiment or abstract reasoning passes by, still such piety is nothing more than a poetry of thought or an ornament of language, a certain view taken of nature which one man has and another has not, which gifted minds strike out, which others see to be admirable and ingenious, and which all would be the better for adopting. It is but the theology of nature, just as we talk of the philosophy or the romance of history, or the poetry of childhood, or the picturesque, or the sentimental, or the humorous, or any other abstract quality which the genius, or the caprice of the individual, or the fashion of the day, or the consent of the world recognizes in any set of objects which are subjected to its contemplation. I do not see much difference between avowing that there is no God and implying that nothing definite can be known for certain about him. What I mean by theology, continues Newman, is none of these things. I simply mean the science of God, or the truths we know about God, put into a system, just as we have a science of the stars and call it astronomy, or of the crust of the earth and call it geology. In both these extracts we have the issue clearly set before us. Feeling valid only for the individual is pitted against reason valid universally. The test is a perfect plain one of fact. Theology based on pure reason must in point of fact convince men universally. If it did not, wherein would its superiority consist? If it only formed sects and schools, even as sentiment and mysticism formed them, how would it fulfill its program of freeing us from personal caprice and waywardness? This perfectly definite practical test of the pretensions of philosophy are found on universal reason, simplifies my procedure today. I need not discredit philosophy by laborious criticism of its arguments. It will suffice if I show that, as a matter of history, it fails to prove its pretension to be objectively convincing. In fact, philosophy does so fail. It does not banish differences, it founds schools and sects, just as feeling does. I believe, in fact, that the logical reason of man operates in this field of divinity exactly as it has always operated in love, or in patriotism, or in politics, or in any other of the wider affairs of life, in which our passions or our mystical intuitions fit our beliefs beforehand. It finds arguments for our conviction, for indeed it has to find them. It amplifies and defines our faith and dignifies it and lends it words and plausibility. It hardly ever engenders it. It cannot now secure it. As regards to the secondary character of the intellectual constructions and of the primacy of feeling and the instinct in founding religious beliefs, see the striking work of H. Fielding, The Hearts of Men, London, 1902, which come into my hands after my text was written. Creeds, says the author, are the grammar of religion. They are to religion what grammar is to speech. Words are the expression of our wants. Grammar is the theory formed afterwards. Speech never proceeded from grammar, but the reverse. As speech progresses and changes from unknown causes, grammar must follow, page 313. The whole book, which keeps unusually close to concrete facts, is little more than an amplification of this text. Lend me your attention while I run through some of the points of the older systematic theology. You find them in both Protestant and Catholic manuals, best of all in the innumerable textbooks published since Pope Leo's encyclical recommending the study of St. Thomas. I glance first at the arguments by which dogmatic theology establishes God's existence. After that, those by which it establishes his nature. And for convenience's sake, I follow the order of A. Stockel's Letterbach de Philosophie, 5th Auflage, Mainz 1881, Bonn 2, B. Badeder's Natural Theology, London 1891, a handy English Catholic manual, but almost identical doctrine given by such Protestant Theologians, S.D. Hodge, Systematic Theology, New York,